Alright, this is number 16, part 2 in the Prager Rational Bible. Let's begin. Alright, the section Ingratitude as a Source of Evil and Unhappiness, verse 9. Is it not enough for you that the God of Israel has set you apart from the community of Israel and given you access to him to perform the duties of the Lord's tabernacle and to minister to the community and serve them? 10. Now that he has advanced you and all your fellow Israelites with you, do you seek the priesthood too? So in addition to envy of the priesthood, Moses pointed to another flaw in the rebels' character: ingratitude. God had given them a special role. The God of Israel set you apart from the community of Israel and has given you access to him. And yet those Levites who supported Korach wanted even more: the authority, the power, and the statue of the Aaronic priesthood. And there are, as is all well too known, many bad human traits, but ingratitude must be ranked among the worst. An ingrate cannot be either happy or a decent person. And moreover, ingratitude is rarely related to a person's situation. And there are people whose lives are filled with good fortune, and yet they're profoundly ungrateful. And even sadly, many who's living in America get to enjoy all these freedoms and all that, and yet we're still not grateful. We're complaining about how evil America is. Well, one side anyway. And you wouldn't even get to complain about the country, and unless there was freedom. Many people who even have good fortune are profoundly ungrateful, and they are people whom life has truly hurt, and there are people whom life has truly hurt who nevertheless actually walk around grateful. Some people who really have it rough, and yet they're still grateful. And given how little gratitude is related to people's situations, gratitude must be regarded as more of a value than as a feeling. Gratitude does not come naturally to most people. It's a value that needs to be cultivated, just as do other values need to be cultivated as well, like self-discipline, humility, honesty, and courage. And courage is definitely a big one, because only very few people are courageous. And really, you can't be a decent person if you don't have courage either, because cowards basically help evil, and they don't stand up to evil. That is why good parents must tell their children many thousands of times, say thank you. And if gratitude were built into the human nature, a child would not have to be told repeatedly to say thank you. And the Torah and the rest of the Bible is a wisdom teacher, which is why as the Western world has abandoned the Bible as its central text, it has lost wisdom and substituted feelings. Sadly, at the universities. And one of the primary Torah wisdom lessons ultimately is the need to be grateful, and the disasters that ensue whenever people are ungrateful. And the Torah repeatedly uses stories of ingratitude to warn against this dark trait. For example, the story of the Israelites' 40 years in the wilderness after leaving Egypt revolves around the Israelites' ingratitude for their liberation from Egypt. Despite all the miracles God performed on their behalf, from being freed from slavery to being fed in the wilderness, they constantly complained and often rebelled. as evidenced in this chapter. Yeah, and even at the end of the chapter. See, for example, physical reminders to be grateful. Genesis 35:1, and the unique significance of remembering. Exodus 10:2, and miracles, faith, and gratitude. Exodus 32:8. And those are all in his Genesis and Exodus Rational Bibles. And as I write in Exodus 10:2, gratitude takes effort. Resentment is effortless. The rebels were therefore simply acting in accord with human nature. Ungrateful people want more, and even, perhaps especially, want more even when they already have a great deal. Yeah, but when you're ungrateful, yeah, what you have is not good enough. And usually you get greedy or jealous or resentful. And it leads to evil, like rebelling against these godly leaders. And this story is another one of the many reasons I believe I believe in the authenticity and divine origin of the Torah. It is highly unlikely that Jews would have made up a story so critical of the most prestigious tribe in Israel. Yeah, well, Dennis, why can't you say the same thing about the New Testament? Because there's a lot of embarrassing details there too that I don't think could be made up. I mean, the disciples pretty much are like the disciples. Yeah, I mean, and they were the ones who wrote the stuff down. I mean, if you were making it up, you wouldn't really make yourself look bad. Yeah, you wouldn't say that you ran away from Jesus while the women went down to the tomb. Yep. And then, of course, it was probably, and of course, Peter has a lot of embarrassing details. Yeah, well, there's even embarrassing details about Jesus. I mean, he's called a glutton and a drunkard. He's called a Samaritan. He's called demon-possessed. Even his own family thinks he's out of his mind. His own people want to throw him off a cliff. I mean, I think if you were making something up about a Messiah, I don't know if you would be making any of those details up. And if you were making up a Messiah, I don't think you would have him crucified on a cross. And so, and then I don't think that you would be a coward hiding away from the Jews at one point. And then, seeing him raised from the dead and then being willing to die for that. I mean, if it was all just a lie. When it could have been easily disproven ultimately, really, in the beginning, but it wasn't. You just had the story made up that the disciples stole the body, which is just ridiculous. So, I just hope that, Dennis could also end up believing in the New Testament for the same reasons, because of the embarrassing details. Well, he believes the embarrassing details about the Jews in the Old Testament. It's one of the reasons why he believes it. Well, I wonder if that same reasoning could be applied with the New. So, I'm just wondering. And I think, and even the apologist Frank Turek has, talked about this. Well, this is where I learned this from. I got this stuff from Frank Turek at Cross-Examined. You should go check him out. He's got some good stuff. So, and he's mentioned Dennis Prager some. But I'm just hoping, he'll believe before it's too late. Alright, verse 11. Truly is it against the Lord that you and all your company have banded together? For who is Aaron that you should rail against him? And Moses pointed out that although Korach and his followers claimed to be rebelling against Aaron and Moses, they were actually really rebelling against God. Aaron did not appoint himself to be high priest. God did. But Moses' argument presumably fell on deaf ears, since Korah's whole contention was that it was not God who appointed Moses and Aaron to their high positions, even though he did. But Korach's argument made no sense, since he knew, as the Israelites did, that it was Moses who negotiated with Pharaoh, and he knew that Moses was God's conduit to bringing the 10 plagues on Egypt, and he saw Moses raise his staff to split the sea, and he witnessed Moses bring down the 10 Commandments from Mount Sinai. All right, verse 12. Moses sent for Dathan and Abiram, sons of Eliab. And this guy, Friedman, he said this: 2 groups with different complaints have joined together to challenge Moses. Korach and his followers challenge Aaron's hold on the priesthood, and Dathan and Abiram challenge Moses' hold on the leadership of Israel. And this political union of 2 agendas is presumably arranged to strengthen the positions of both. Moses, however, keeps them separate. He has responded first to Korach and his company, who are challenging the priestly prerogatives of Moses and Aaron, but now he turns to Dathan and Abiram and summons them, and by separating them he weakens their position. Okay. But Dathan and Abiram say, "We will not come." Yeah, they refused to even appear before Moses. And moreover, they publicly announced their refusal. Yeah, the audacity of doing such a thing. Yep, which showed how much support they believed they had, and how weakened they believed Moses' position had become. All right, and then Dathan and Abiram can continue. "Is it not enough that you brought us from the land flowing with milk and honey, to have us die in the wilderness, that you would also lord it over us?" And Dathan and Abiram invoked the language God and Moses used to describe the promised land, a land flowing with milk and honey, to describe all of the places, the place where they had suffered as slaves their entire lives, their entire lifetimes. Yeah. So it looks like they're referring to Egypt as the land flowing with milk and honey. Yep. The rebels blamed Moses and Aaron for taking them from the land flowing with milk and honey. Yep, so they're talking about Egypt, so there you go. Even though that phrase was used to talk about the promised land in Canaan. Aside from their disrespect and ingratitude and shutzpah, I don't know what that means. What they said was absurd. Yeah, I mean, this is absurd. Yeah, Egypt had been a hellhole for the Hebrews, yet this too accords with human nature. Yep. Joseph Stalin, he murdered between 20 to 40 million Soviet citizens, the majority of them Russians, whom he also deprived all human rights for a quarter century whenever he was in power. Yeah, because he reigned from like the 1920s to like the 1950s. Now, of course, the U.S. did ally with him in World War II to fight against Hitler. Yeah, but Stalin was still evil, though, because, immediately after World War II, he pretty much starts the Cold War with the U.S. that would go all the way into the 1990s. Well, it would end in the 90s under Reagan. So, anyway, yeah. But nevertheless, at the time of this writing, a majority of Russians regard Stalin as the most outstanding figure in world history. Yeah. And Prager has a video, "Why is Communism Not Hated as Much as Nazism?" Well, one of the reasons is because some of those countries that have practiced communism have not really taken responsibility for it. While as Germany has, attempted to take responsibility and make up for what happened with Nazism, yeah, that has not happened in Russia or China. Yeah, Lenin and Stalin are pretty much still revered in Russia. Yeah, I don't know if Putin would idolize those guys. I wouldn't be surprised because he's pretty bad himself. So, yeah, and then of course Mao was still revered in China, even though he killed like 50 to 70 million people, like starved them. Yeah, with this not so great leap forward, or whatever. Yep. Alright, but anyway. But regarding the accusation to have us died in the wilderness, the rebels had a point. God did in fact announce that as a result of the recent incident with the spies in Numbers 14, the entire generation of the Exodus except Joshua and Caleb would die in the wilderness. But instead of blaming themselves and their lack of faith, ultimately, they instead blame Moses for this. Verse 14. Even if you had brought us to a land flowing with milk and honey, and given us possession of the fields and vineyards, should you gouge out these men's eyes? What? This verse could and perhaps be translated maybe like this. Moreover, you have not brought us into a land flowing with milk and honey, nor given us a possession of fields and vineyards. Will you gouge out those men's eyes? And Lier Godalib, however you say that, he explains their comment like this. Bringing us to the edge of the promised land and then making us retreat from it is like gouging out our eyes. It's showing us what we desire, but then taking it away from us. It's not Moses' fault. You did not believe in the Lord. Yeah, Joshua and Caleb did, so they get to go in. Yep, so Moses is calling them up, but then they say, we will not come. And Dathan and Abiram repeated their audacious defiance of Moses. Alright, why did Moses defend himself to God? Alright, 15. Moses was aggrieved, and he said to the Lord, pay no regard to their oblation offering. I have not taken the ass of any one of them, of course, donkey, nor have I wronged any one of them. And the word here translated as aggrieved, or vayekar, it means angered. And angry Moses defended himself before God and before the community, telling, not merely requesting of God to ignore the rebels' offering, given that he had not so much as taken a donkey from any of them. And this seems odd. Did God not know all of this? Did Moses really have to make his case in the upcoming contest with Korach? And here are two possible explanations for Moses' self-defense here. One, it was a spontaneous emotional outburst. And Moses wasn't really worried that God would favor Korach and the rebels. Yeah, so maybe he was just angry and he was letting it out. Or two, if Moses said this in front of the community, we would have no reason to believe it was said to God in private. He did so both to consolidate his support among those who continued to support him and also to humiliate his opponents. So, I don't know. 16. And Moses said to Korah, tomorrow you and all your company appear before the Lord, you, they, and Aaron. Each of you take his fire pan and lay incense on it, and each of you bring his fire pan before the Lord, 250 pans. They have fire pans, and you and Aaron also bring your fire pans. Now this test was clear to everyone. bringing an unauthorized fire to the tabernacle, it resulted in death, which is precisely what happened with Aaron's two sons, Nadab and Abihu, in Leviticus 10. Now, why did Korach go along with Moses' test? So each of them took his fire pan, put fire on it, laid incense on it, and took it to his place at the entrance of the tent of meeting, as did Moses and Aaron. And Korach, whatever, gathered the whole community against them at the entrance of the tent of meeting. So there are three possible explanations why Korach agreed to Moses' test. One explanation is that he had no choice, and this is Richard Elliott Friedman's explanation. Okay, so this must be that Friedman guy quoted earlier. Why does Korach go along with the test? Do he and his team and his followers really believe that God would support him? Answer: they had no choice. Korach could not refuse. The whole point, after all, is that Korach is seeking priesthood. What Moses challenges him to do is to perform one of the acts that he would commonly have to do if he were to become priest: burn incense. And Korach's claim on the priesthood would evaporate if he were to decline that opportunity. He has been offered to do a priestly task. Okay. Now, Friedman might be right, though it can't be argued that Korach might have found a way to avoid the contest if he thought that he would lose. As the verse makes clear, having widespread support, at least among many of the tribal leaders — community often refers to the community's leaders — he probably could have manufactured any excuse not to take the test and still would have retained his supporters. But a second possible explanation for why Korach immediately agreed to Moses' test is that he actually believed that he would win. And Korach was confident in his cause. Those who do evil often at least have as much confidence in the righteousness of their cause. Believing God and or their conscience supports their behavior as those who are in the right. And while some evil ideologues do not believe in the doctrine in whose name that they commit evil, most do. And a third possible explanation is Korach's concern with face or honor. Having called out Moses in front of the entire nation, Korach put himself in a position where he could not easily back down, and he could not know his comments would result in a duel to the death. And then the presence of the Lord appeared to the whole community. The whole community likely refers to the whole community of Korach's followers and not to the entire Israelite people. And the translation uses the word company in verse 16, despite the fact that the Hebrew edah is the same in that verse as it is here, though it's translated as community and not company. In verse 20, the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, "Stand back from this community that I may annihilate them in an instant." And when God previously threatened to punish or annihilate the Israelites, he exposed those threats solely to Moses. Here the rebellion was as much against Aaron as against God and Moses, so God addressed them both. Most good people do not fight evil. So stand back from this community that I may annihilate them in an instant. Is this community, Edah, the Hebrew, Israel or Korach's community? Now the text is not entirely clear. It could mean either. But in keeping with my read of community in Numbers 16 and 19, and because God says this community, not the community, it more likely refers to Korach's community and not all of Israel. But in either case, there's no indication that anyone rose up against Korach. It is a fact of the life that communities, even whole nations, suffer the most whenever the decent do not fight against the indecent. Good people fall into three categories. Now, of course, good not according to God's standards, which is being morally perfect, so none of us are good in that sense. Yeah, but more of like good, like character or good behavior, Yeah, basically. So, but there's there's three types of people like that. Those who fight evil, and those who aid the fighters, and those who do nothing. The latter category is usually the largest one, because fighting takes effort and, most importantly, takes courage, the rarest of all the good human qualities. That good people need to fight evil has long been known, but to no avail. There is an additional problem aside from the paucity of courageous individuals. Most people either do not learn from history, or they learn the wrong lessons, or they're simply ignorant of history. And therefore they lack wisdom, the word that describes learning from history, learning from others, learning from elders, and learning from wise works, ultimately from the Bible. Good is not attained without wisdom. 2,500 years ago, Plato wrote The Republic. The penalty good men pay for indifference to public affairs is to be ruled by evil men. In 1867, the British philosopher John Stuart Mill said this: "Bad men need nothing more than to compass their ends than that good men should look on and do nothing." And the most familiar version of this sentiment is this: "The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing." And this is attributed, probably incorrectly, to the British statesman and philosopher Edmund Burke. Yep. Whenever good doesn't fight against evil or does nothing, then evil ends up triumphing. And that's probably why so much evil has become so prevalent in this country, because a lot of us Christians and conservatives have been too cowardly to deal with it whenever it wasn't as bad, and trying to go along to get along, and how well has that worked out? But many of us still do. And sadly, I think that's probably what happened, I guess, in Nazi Germany. Many people went along with the Nazis, to go along to get along, and how well did that work out? And sadly, a lot of times, many churches do the same thing. Like with COVID, how many went along to get along with the mandates? Only very few, like MacArthur, stood up against those mandates. So, anyway. Alright, verse 22. "But they fell on their faces and said, O God, source of the breath of all flesh, when one man sins, will you be wrathful with the whole community?" And Moses and Aaron pleaded with God not to inflict collective punishment, since only a few individuals have sinned. One is not necessarily meant literally, given that Dathan and Abiram and not only Korach sinned. On the other hand, it might refer to Korach alone, as he was the ringleader. According to Friedman, Moses' plea to God is reminiscent of Abraham's plea in the case of Sodom and Gomorrah in Genesis 18. "Will you also annihilate the virtuous with the wicked?" in Genesis 18:23. And the connection to the case of Sodom is highlighted by the fact that Moses tells the people to get away or else you will be annihilated, which are the words that the angels say at Sodom. Yeah, and these words occur nowhere else in the Torah. Genesis 18:23 through 24, and then 19:15 and 17. Alright, verse 23, the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the community and say, Withdraw from the abodes of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram. It didn't take much arguing from Moses and Aaron for God to relent, which strongly suggests that God never intended to destroy the whole community. I guess not destroy all the people of Israel, just these rebels. 25, and Moses rose and went to Dathan and Abiram, the elders of Israel following him, and he addressed the community, saying, Move away from the tents of these wicked men. This is a good idea for everyone. As the Talmud states, keep away from an evil neighbor and do not associate with the wicked. And that's why most parents fear their child is associating with bad peers, and why many adults have ruined their lives as a result of their association with bad people. Yeah, and as Paul says in the New Testament, bad company corrupts good morals. And touch nothing that belongs to them, lest you be wiped out for all of their sins. 27, so they withdrew from the abodes of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram, and now Dathan and Abiram had come out, and they stood at the entrance of their tents with their wives and their children and their little ones. And like Korah, the other rebels who apparently were so confident in their cause apparently had no fear of punishment. The boldness wrongdoers possess is one of the advantages that they often have over decent people who are often less self-confident. And whether out of fear, obedience, or agreement with the rebellion, the families of these two rebels joined their husbands and their fathers. Korach's sons, however, did not follow their father, and they were not punished. Numbers 26:11. Alright, in verse 28, and Moses said, By this you shall know it was the Lord who sent me to do all these things, and that they are not of my own devising. If these men die as all men do, if their lot be the common fate of all mankind, it was not the Lord who sent me. But if the Lord brings about something unheard of, so that the ground opens its mouth and swallows them up with all that belongs to them, and they go down alive into Sheol, you shall know that these men have spurned the Lord. Okay. And in these verses, Moses explained the test. If these rebels die as all men do, due to sickness or accident or war or old age, well then they were in the right. But if something never before seen or heard of happens, a new thing happens, like the ground opening up and swallowing them alive, it'll be clear that Moses' status was divinely appointed and these people were in the wrong. In the Hebrew words translated as something unheard of, Brayayivra, however you say that, which means a new creation of God. Moses predicted God would create a new way of guilty individuals being put to death. The earth would open up and swallow Korah and his co-conspirators, and they would go down to Sheol, the place of the dead, while alive and not after death. And unless God put the idea in Moses' head and the Torah did not record it, Moses in effect called on God to do something God never hinted he would do. And Jacob Milgram sees this in a negative light, arguing that the once humble Moses was growing somewhat arrogant, a trait that would lead him into a grievous sin in Numbers 20. And Milgram may be right. But an equally plausible explanation is that Moses was so frustrated by the constant caviling against him. He wanted God to provide a spectacularly dramatic sign that he sided with Moses and not the rebels. And Moses' prediction and prayer that the rebels be punished in a unique way was also motivated by a desire to demonstrate how evil the rebels were in God's eyes, since only God could open up the earth and swallow a select number of people. And yeah, Sheol refers to the place where dead people go, not necessarily hell. Yeah, Genesis 37:35, where Jacob declared that he would go down to Sheol, mourning his son Joseph. Yeah, because he thought Joseph was dead, even though he wasn't. Only later in Jewish tradition did Sheol come to be associated with hell. Yeah. And I think I've heard it like Sheol said, like you have like a righteous side and you have like an unrighteous side. Yeah, and that Jesus, like whenever he died, he went to like the righteous side of Sheol, I guess, yeah, the paradise, yeah, heaven, yeah, and then the unrighteous side, yeah, hell, where I guess that rich man went to in Luke 16, and then the righteous side, I guess Abraham's bosom, yeah, so in that same passage, but anyway, and yeah, Jesus did not go to hell when he died, no, not at all, he went to paradise. Alright, in verse 31, scarcely had he finished speaking all these words when the ground under them burst asunder. And why did God punish the rebels as families? And the earth opened its mouth and swallowed them up with their households, all of Korach's people and all of their possessions. And God punished Korach and his followers just as Moses had predicted. The Torah uses the exact same words to describe both the leaders' fate foretold by Moses and the punishment afflicted by God, making it irrefutable that God supported Moses. That God apparently killed the wives and children of Korach's people has disturbed some Bible readers. And yeah, one of the objections that non-believers raise against the Bible is, why would God kill women and children and babies? But however, we have reason to assume that they participated in the revolt, because Korach's two sons who did not join their father's rebellion were not killed. Again, Numbers 26:11. And Frank Turek actually says, people really don't die, they just change location. Yeah, that is a hard thing of, people getting upset about women and children getting killed, but of course, if you don't believe that there's a God, well then why could you say that that's wrong? Because you have no objective standard to say that that's ultimately wrong. Yeah. And you're arguing, and he's got a book called Stealing from God. You got to steal from God in order to argue against him. And Greg Koukl refers to this as infanticide, where you're basically making an argument that's dependent on the very thing that you're arguing against. You need God in order to have objective morality. So you can't argue against God whenever you're objecting whenever you're objecting to something that God did that you call evil. You really ultimately don't have any standard, and you're arguing against the only thing that gives you that standard. Yeah. So it really basically defeats itself. Yeah. All right. Yeah, and besides, little children and babies, it's sad when they get swept away, obviously, but I believe, little children and babies, would be in heaven, yeah. And also they wouldn't continue in the evil of the parents. So maybe that was a way of making sure that wouldn't happen. Yeah, because usually, the kids could end up following in the evil footsteps of the parents. So. Alright. Yeah, but anyway. 33, they went down alive into Sheol with all that belonged to them, and the earth closed over them, and they vanished from the midst of the congregation. And all of Israel fled at their shrieks, for they said, the earth might swallow us. And only one can say that, notwithstanding all the miracles that God performed on their behalf. It was not easy being Israel at the time, nor has it ever been. Alright, verse 35. And a fire went forth from the Lord and consumed 250 men, offering the incense. Korach and his people died when the earth opened up and swallowed them. The 250 leaders died by fire, and as noted, Korach's sons did not follow their father, and they did not die. In fact, centuries later, the authorship of no fewer than 11 psalms, 42 and 44 through 49, 84, 85, 87, 88, was attributed to Korach's descendants. And the prophet Samuel is recorded in the biblical book of Chronicles as a descendant of Korach. Really? Okay. And Numbers 16 actually continues in, of course, the Christian Bible, but for the Jewish ones, no. The rest of 16 actually is 17 for the Jews. So since the Jewish Bibles would have the end of 16 and 17, well, I guess I'll save those for the chapter 17 chapter then. Okay. So I guess 17 will be a continuation of 16, I guess, for the Christian, but not for the Jews. Alright, and I'll probably point out the verses as I go in that one. Alright, well, Lord willing, I'll get to 17 next time. Yeah, but until then, may God bless you, and the grace and mercy won by Jesus, the love of God, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with you all.